But anyway, so Eduardo, please.
Yeah, sure. I just briefly would just like to welcome Gonzalo to our seminar series. Gonzalo is spending a sabbatical visiting George Mason at one of the labs of the economics department, but he's originally from Mexico, and he's now going to tell us about some of his collaborative work with some of the people actually associated with this department, particularly with Omar.
Very good.
Go right ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation, for being here. So I'm going to talk about the project that Omar and some other people have been working the last year or so. We keep doing that. It's a research program. So this is part of this project. This is a paper already published, but I decided to present it because it's just kind of the seminar paper for us that everything has evolved through this paper. So I just emphasize my name with that because I'm the presenter here, but that doesn't mean that I'm the leader in this project. As Eduardo already mentioned, I am in touch with this Omar. It's a former student of Bob, and I will be working with him pretty soon also in London, where he's the Allen Turing. Okay, let me give you the motivation of my talk about prioritizing policies. So, you know, economists, we have a very narrow view of economic development when we think about it in macro terms, because we always associate development with growth, basically. So we have these mathematical polynomials, some of them sophisticated, but at the end, the only thing that interests researchers is which are these sources of growth. Also, there is a lot of empirical literature, and the main tool that we use are regression analysis. So the idea is just to move from those tools and to move from this thinking of development in terms of very unidimensional aspect of development. So here we are trying to emphasize that it's a multidimensional setting, it's a process, it's a dynamic process. There are many indicators behind, there are many policies, there are many goals. So we have the impression that this complexity network tools are more efficient to grasp the core idea behind the development process. Just to give you an idea, we summarize all these development indicators in terms of development pillars. So each color bar that you see there is one pillar. For instance, in the left side we have governance of firms, and the opposite side we have the cost of doing business. So there are 13 pillars over there. This is a typical classification that is used in the literature. Within each color you see different bars. Each bar corresponds to a type of country. So all the countries that we have in the sample, I don't recall exactly the number, but it should be around 150. We classify them in terms of cluster analysis. So the bar to the left is the countries in cluster 1, which belong to advanced countries, and the last group is the poor countries. Mexico is in the second bar, is higher income countries. Okay, so we have a lot of indicators. We have a large sample of countries, and so we are going to do, in terms of our empirical work, we are going to analyze all those countries and all those indicators.
One question, just maybe for background, because not everybody knows this is an economist. Just, why don't you just mention, does it matter very much which indicator, if it's a World Bank indicator or whether it's an IDB indicator, does that matter very much? Or I guess, maybe just give the 1 minute version of how does one construct an indicator?
Mm-hmm. Well, in our case, we use these secondary sources. The origin of these sources is very different. Some of them are from the World Bank, others are from this World Competitiveness Forum. But right now, all these institutions, these multilateral organizations, are coming together because they are creating this idea that countries should try to reach the sustainable development goals. So they're creating a consensus in terms of which indicators are more well designed and they are not in contradiction one with the other. So that's a big improvement. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But right now it's just a mixture of indicators that we took from different sources. Okay. in this case, instead of the pillars, we have the specific indicators. So in the horizontal axis, you have the indicators. Each of these bands specifies the development pillar where the indicator is located. As you can see, the countries that are in cluster 4, the poorest ones, have the lowest level of the indicator. And countries in cluster 1, the advanced countries, is the blue line. So as you can see, as you progress, you move from cluster 4, the poorest to the richest, the level in most of the indicators goes up. Obviously, all these indicators are normalized in order to make comparisons, okay? If you see, for example, around the gray band, you see that the gap between the blue and the green line is very large. There is a name for that in the economic development literature. There is a middle income trap. So it's easy to move from cluster 4 to 3, but it's very difficult to move from cluster 2 to 1. You have this middle income trap. So that is related precisely in the bands that have this color gray, green, and blue. Okay. For instance, the blue represents public governance. So it's very difficult to give this big step for these middle income countries. On the contrary, if you look at the green band, which corresponds to the health pillar, you see there is a big gap between the red and the orange. So for countries that are at this level of development, health and infrastructure issues seems to be very important. Okay, so our talk and our paper is not related to this idea that how is that countries specify their goals to pursue. There could be many reasons. I just specify some of them. For instance, is political decision, an internal decision. We should go for the economy, for growth, or for inequality, or perhaps environmental concerns. I don't know. Perhaps it's an internal agreement. Maybe you just want to follow other countries because they were very successful. Everybody wants to be Denmark. Let's go for the Danish mode of development. Or let's suppose that you are a government in a state and you're very authoritarian. So you just decide. You just pick whatever you prefer. There is no reason for that. That's very common to do it. Or maybe there is an international consensus. I'm thinking about this Washington consensus, this recommendation of this multilateral organization, that this is the approach that everybody should follow. Or perhaps it's a democratic society, and so there is pressure. Civil society has a saying in how these goals are going to be established. Well, those are very interesting ideas per se, but we are not going to analyze. How is that countries select their goals? What we are analyzing here, we are interested in how policies are defined to reach those goals, wherever they are. Okay? And this is, we believe, is a hot topic. When we started to do this, we were not really conscious about it. I mean, we were worried about this concern, but we were not so clear that it was a hot topic. But it has become a very hot topic, especially after I was just mentioning these SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Not only the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, is their main agenda. Also the World Bank, Inter-American Bank, the Asian Bank, the OECD, all of them are pushing this agenda for the 2030. And if you just look at the webpage of the UNDP, you have this phrase that is really clear that in order to solve this problem, you have to use networks, that type of analytical tool. No? The goals are interconnected. So you cannot do it with regression analysis. You should do other type of analysis because there is a link. There is a network, and there are trade-offs, and there are synergies among indicators. So in order to disentangle all those complexities, you have to take in everything like an indivisible whole, not like a silo isolated. Okay. So it's a hot issue. I mean, it's a very important concern for these multilateral organizations. So usually, as I mentioned before, how economists tackle this problem? Well, regression analysis. Which is the main problem with regression analysis? Universal, unidimensional. Just go. Perhaps inequality, but it's just one dimension. It's not context, it's not country specific. You estimate these panel regressions, the estimate that you get out of it define a hypothetical country. Those estimates are marginal effects for the average country included in the sample. It's not for a specific countries. You have lots of problems in terms of correlation between independent variables and endogeneity problem. So although we estimate some marginal effects, let's say if I increase education 1%, which is the impact on growth, they presume that they are able to do that, but behind that estimate, there are many concerns. Then in the 80s, or something like that, some people from Harvard came with this idea, growth diagnostics. And they were emphasizing this idea that is a problem of context specificity, that each country is very different. That was the key problem of the Washington Consensus. So you need to create a framework to find out which are the important bottlenecks that impose some hurdles for these countries to grow. So that's a good thought, but the problem is that also it's unidimensional, it's just growth. In practice, basically they only consider very few variables. The way they tackle this problem is trying to estimate prices, because prices, as you know, as an economist, is a way to measure scarcity. So that's very simple in the case of the financial system, because you have interest rates. And perhaps in the case of education, because you don't have a price of education, but you have this econometric exercise to estimate with hedonic prices, like a proxy of the price of education. But what about infrastructure for the whole country, or what about governance? Which is the price of that? So it's difficult to do it in practice, and you have to be an expert in many fields in order to estimate all those prices. So basically, although you use econometrics and expertise in different fields, it's just a qualitative framework. Because of that reason, it hasn't improved a lot since the 80s or 90s when it was developed. Then the typical exercise which is very common, is not very scientific, is just comparison, benchmarking. You just have these lots of indicators, like the cost of doing business is a whole book for like of these indicators. So you make comparisons and you say, oh well, the education level in Mexico is this, and I want to be in this case like Finland, because I know that the Finnish people are doing very good work in that regard, so I should try to improve my index. That's the way they do it. There are many books or papers reported by these multilateral organizations that are designed just in this type of methodology. Then you also have Bayesian average, which is the most scientific of all these. And at least with the first generation, the problem is that they are not specific for this country. You have to make some clustering there of countries in order to, you have to pull some countries in order to have some estimates, and you really don't need causality, but you are measuring all type of relationships. But that's the first generation. This is changing. So in the next step of our model, I think we will do something in Bayesian. Okay, so that's the problem in terms of the important issue for the world, how to push this agenda in a quantitative sense, and but we cannot use this typical methodology. So which is the alternative? Well, the first thing we have to use is this idea of context. The problem is specific for each country. So to give you an idea of that, we just estimated these networks. You can estimate one network per country, but I'm not going to show you all those networks, only one for each cluster. We aggregated all the countries in one cluster, so you can see that each network is very different. You have many points within the diagonal. That means that many indicators within the pillar are related, but also there are many dots outside the diagonal that really tell you there are many interesting interdependencies. For instance, if you improve education, some years later on, you will have some improvement in terms of health. So those kind of relationships are the ones that we're trying to catch. So the interrelationship between indicators is completely different from one cluster to the other, and we use an analysis that is not all that aggregated, is much more clear. are Mexico, matrix or Mexico network versus the Sweden network, you are going to realize it's completely different. So that's one important thing in our group. Use this network for dealing with the specificity of each country. Then for the theoretical part, we decided to create a political economy game. So we have decisions to be made. So it's not only a data framework, it has a theoretical content. So we specify this principal agent problem, that you have a central authority that designs policies, and by design I mean creates a distribution of resources, how budgetary resources are going to be allocated through all these different issues. And so they give money to these public functionaries, bureaucrats. Those are in charge of implementing the different policies. Okay? And that's why you create this problem. So at the center of this graph, which is in Spanish there, you have the government, the central authority, and they have this interdependency with the different agents in the system. So in methodologically speaking, we have this political economy game on a net. We don't use this rational type of analysis as most of us economists did in the past, but we use certain type of reinforcement learning algorithms. Okay. So what is the benefits of our approach? Well, I have a list of these benefits. The first is we have a theoretical model. And because that, we can specify some causality links. For example, which is the relation from the macro to the micro, and then from the micro to the macro. So we can introduce all these social mechanisms, this word that is common in the people from sociology, all these causality channels that go to the different levels. So we can do that. As I mentioned before, with these networks, we can estimate some of these interdependencies between socioeconomic indicators. The model scales pretty well. You know, I mentioned about this growth diagnostic. You need a lot of experts for doing that kind of analysis. Here is not the case. You can have as many indicators as you want. Okay. The only problem is data limitation, because you need certain coverage in terms of the time series. But besides limitation of the data, computationally speaking, is easy to escalate this model. Then we also have this context. We have initial condition of all these indicators. We have targets, and we have a network that is already calibrated on the data. Because we have a theory and we have different type of information, we can validate our model externally or internally. We can give some inference with regard to the level of corruption that exists in each particular country, not only about technical efficiency, but what do I mean by technical efficiency? Is that you assign certain budget, and that budget, part of it is not just because of corruption, or just plain inefficiency, because they are very negligent, they are not professional, whatever. That is called technical efficiency. Versus allocative inefficiency, which means that you are not assigning properly those resources. According to your goals, you should reallocate your resources. The estimate that I've seen, the Inter-American Development, that the report that they produced for this year, deals precisely with this problem. The problems of allocative versus technical inefficiency, and those are really huge. Not only because of corruption, but also because just plain inefficiencies. Okay, so we can have estimates for those two types of inefficiencies. And it's a very simple. Once you have the platform, the computer model is very easy to replicate. You don't need this expertise to apply it in different countries at the international, at the national level or sub-national level. So let's go with our theoretical formulation. So as I mentioned, our objective is to define these profiles, how resources are distributed between the different policy issues. We will have a central authority. That's the central authority makes the decision to do it. And then the functionaries or bureaucrats, they are the ones in charge of implementing that policy. One interesting thing about this model, I think, is that we're not only concerned about the design of the policy, but about the process of policy making. So both issues are involved, the design of policy and the implementation of policy, okay? And because we have these two different agents with different perspectives, there are problems of misalignment of interests. Now, there is a problem of asymmetry in terms of information, but the source of that asymmetry comes from the fact that there are spillover effects. What I have in mind, let's say that you are the Minister of Health and you receive a budget. So you want to invest those resources to have hospitals, to pay doctors, whatever. But you don't do it. Some of those resources go to your pocket, or you are very inefficient. You are not doing what you are supposed to do. If everything were very transparent, if there were no problems of information, the central authority will recognize that that people is doing something wrong. But the central government cannot recognize that, because the indicators of health can improve for some other reasons, because the indicators of health, of education are also improving. So maybe people are taking care of themselves without these extra resources. You know what I mean? There are contributions in all these indicators, and all of them can work in the same direction. There are some synergies. Health is improving not because of the Minister of Health, but because other indicators, other areas in the economy are improving. So because of those spillover effects, there is a misalignment in incentives.
You also have an assumption of possible reverse, where your official is trying to do well and the other factors are bringing it down. Does your model come from that too?
Yeah, well, we will have some feedback between, not only between the different functionaries, but also between the functionaries and government. Our government is endogenous at the moment, we would say. Okay, these authorities, the central authority, are monitoring because they are aware. They didn't know where the corruption are, but they are aware that exists. So they are trying to monitor. They use media or any sources they have at their disposal to detect those activities of corruption. So there are penalties, or resources can be reallocated when they detect some mispractice. Okay, this image, this diagram will give you a good idea. You have the government. So the horizontal line, the orange arrow, is the speed, which is just distribution of resources. So government assigns to the bureaucrats some resources. In terms of what? T, which are the targets, and I, which are the indicators. So the bureaucrat has some objective function, which is I want to improve the indicator because that gives me status, but also I have personal gains to make. So they have this dilemma: improve the indicator or for my own benefit. So the bureaucrat decides to make some contributions. That's the money that is really going to the system. And so it affects the world, okay? The indicator can increase, but other bureaucrats can decide the opposite. The level of contribution is going to be very small. So from time to time, there are going to be scandals of corruption. No? You don't know the probability of corruption. Anything is, all these kind of things are not known by the agents. There is a lot of problems of information in this model, but from time to time you have media scandals. For example, if you are corrupt, but slightly corrupt, you will be non-noticed. But if in a particular moment the level of corruption is really large, then you could be detected. No? The probability of being detected will increase. So there we have arrows going in both directions. So you see there is a learning process that will take place between the way the economy operates and the type of contribution that you are assigning. And also there is this feedback also with the government. The government also reacts to these scandals and adapts and changes from time to time the distribution of the resources. So we have like a co-evolutionary, co-learning process of assigning resources. In terms of the mathematics, I'm not going to. We have first this type of a logistic equation for the level of the indicator. That depends on the gap, target minus the indicator. And then the last part, it has to do with your own contributions and with the contribution of all the parties involved, with all these bureaucrats involved. F is the objective function of the bureaucrat. As I mentioned before, it depends on I, the level of the indicator, but also depends in the personal gain, which is P minus C. No? P is the money that you receive, C is the money that you eat in the system, and theta has to do with this possibility of getting caught in fraudulent practices. And that theta is related with the relative level of corruption that in which you are involved with respect to the rest of society, or the rest of the agents in the system. Then we have this level of contribution, which is defining this type of reinforcement learning. To be more specific, it has to do with this direct learning that has been used in literature. So there are many experiments that have shown that it's commonly used for agents. So basically the idea is very simple. If you increase your contributions and you realize that your benefits are increasing, you just keep doing that. No more complex than that. Then with respect to government want to maximize or minimize the gaps, no, between the indicators and the target. They have this adaptive heuristic, like a propensity. So the amount of resources that you put in each of these policy issues depends on the gap, T minus I. Depends on the degree of the nodes of the policy issue. Okay? If you look at this equation, you will notice that government knows very little. The government doesn't know the whole structure of the network. Only knows that there are some nodes, some policy issues that are more connected than the others. That's the only thing that we suppose that government knows in advance. And also, if you are caught, the official is caught in these fraudulent practices, some resources will be redistributed. Okay, so that's the adaptive heuristic. There is a government budget constraint that has to hold, and basically that is the system. No? Those are the equations. As you can see, we are not only in terms of the design of the policy interested, not only in terms of that, but also in terms of the implementation of the policy. This possibility that some resources are deviated. In terms of the algorithm, it's pretty simple. I only want to emphasize that you have some data that you use as input. As input, A is this agency matrix that comes from data. T are the goals, also are specified exogenous in the model. B is the budget. So the only parameter, if you look at the equations carefully, there are no parameters. For example, theta, the probability, is not a parameter. It's just a stable functional relationship of many variables. That's something that you cannot do with the typical mathematical tools. You have this local criticism that when you have a policy, parameters flip around, this critique of Lucas. Here you don't have that problem because parameter depends on the macro part of the system. It's like a social construct that changes to time. Okay? Okay, so we have these inputs. The only parameter that we really estimate in the model is gamma, the only one, that is related to the dynamic of the indicator, that's the gamma. The endogenous variable C, the contribution, I, the indicators, and P, these policy profiles. There is a rule of convergency. When these indicators don't change to time, then the algorithm stops. Okay. So that's a typical dynamic that it can run the dynamic process. So you can see some indicators convert faster than others. There is a lot of non-linearity. They go up and down. Some of these indicators, they are kind of fuzzy because there are many reactions. There are some punishment, so they decide to change their level of contributions. So many things are taking place behind that process of decision making. Okay. So what we did for this calibration of the network. So we look at the literature. This is an area that is growing. There is no consensus whatsoever. There are many alternatives. So we look for a system that can create certain, can estimate certain causality without the need of having very long series. That was our main concern, because we don't have long series. We have series of 10 years or so, no more than that. So if you do this type of language causality test that econometricians do, you need sometimes 300 years of observation. So we were concerned about that, so we come up with this two-steps procedure. In the first step, you use information theory to identify the dyadic relationships and the weight of each of these pairs. And in the second step, we specify the direction of the change. One of the important limitations of our approach is that we only can measure contemporaneous correlations. And some of correlations in real life take sometimes years to make relevance. No? For example, education and productivity. It doesn't happen in 1 year. You need 10 or more years. We cannot measure that. One, because we don't have very long series. That's an important obstacle. But the other obstacle is still the techniques. I'm not very good at that. They are improving a lot. Still, even in our second generation model, we are going to, I think, in that respect, a lot. Not only to measure this contemporaneous relationship, some lags of the system. Okay, so how we validate our model? First, like a kind of an informal test of validation, we look at some stylized facts of corruption. You look at those facts, you will see there is a very clear negative relationship between corruption and the performance of the countries. Second, there is a lot of variety within each level of development. A country with the same level of development has a lot of dispersion in terms of corruption. Advanced countries have a very small dispersion controlled by the level of income. And there are many countries in one corner. They are very corrupt and they have very low performance. So there are many countries like that. And you will never find a backward country that doesn't have corruption. That doesn't happen. If you have a terrible performance, you have to be corrupt. Almost by definition. Okay.
Is that room?
It's a So that's empirical data. You can see all of this I mentioned before. This is the negative relationship. For each level of development, each color is one cluster of countries. Mexico is over here. Okay, so we are pretty about in terms of corruption. So there is some dispersion, especially from these countries. You will never find a country with poor performance that is not corrupt. You will not see it. Okay? And that's our model. Those are the results of our model. You see the same negative relationship. All those 4 stylized facts that I mentioned are there in our outcome. No? So we were able to replicate it. For doing this, we use this algorithm, this procedure, minimizing the mean square error, and we calibrate this gamma parameter, taking care of not generating problems of overfitting. So we use a regular procedure. So there is only one parameter. So we didn't have a lot of space for overfitting because we only estimate one parameter in the whole model. I think that's a very, very nice thing about the model. But that's just an informal test. A more formal test is we sorted countries in terms of corruption levels, and we compare the data with the model. The data is defined, the model has the bubbles, and you see there is they are very similar one to the other. The R square is pretty high. We do it levels. We also do it in terms of cumulative values. So the empirical data and our simulated data, they go hand in hand.
Now, do you have any insight as to whether the higher performing countries are higher performing because they're less corrupt, or they look less corrupt because the higher performers are better at hiding what they did?
Well, I don't know. my impression, because, you know, I think you should go in both directions.
Yeah.
You enter in a virtuous circle. No? You have to overcome corruption problems to improve, and once you improve, you resolve corruption problems. But we didn't deal with that. Okay. In terms of internal validation, trying to detect these social mechanisms that are really important for generating the outcome, we analyze three things: the learning process for the bureaucrats, the adaptive heuristic of the central authority, and the spillover effects. That means the network matters or doesn't matter. What about if we remove the network from the analysis? So there are interdependencies involved. If there are not interdependencies involved, our theoretical model doesn't work, because the key ingredient of our theoretical model is that some of these bureaucrats hide among themselves in order to make some corruption. So if there is no network, there is no way to hide. Okay? So we check that if there are spillover effects. So here was very simple. We just remove one of these mechanisms, one at a time, and we analyze if the results go through or doesn't show up anymore. Okay? So let's see. First, we we remove the learning mechanism for government and for bureaucrats, and that neat relation that I showed you before just disappears. Doesn't exist anymore. This negative relation, for example, now you are able to find corrupt countries or low performing countries that are not corrupt. So once we remove those learning mechanisms, these stylized facts that I mentioned before disappear. But not if we remove the network. If we remove the network, the same stylized facts are recovered without the network. Well, that was intriguing for us, because that means the network doesn't matter. So our model, our theoretical model is wrong, because that channel doesn't explain the output, doesn't explain the results. So we did other type of analysis in terms of the level of corruption for the different policy issues and for the different countries. And this is the data, the line, the bubbles, the empty bubbles are the full model, and we remove each of these mechanisms. As you can see, once you remove those mechanisms, this relation just disappears. The same happens if you analyze cumulative values. Obviously, this is the most important one, the learning mechanism. But now the network also matters in this case. If you remove the network, your results don't go through. Then one of the advantages, as you know, for this agent-based type of models is that you can analyze the problem at the macro level or at the micro level. So here we did it at the micro level. We analyzed the spillovers. So we have here in the horizontal axis, we have the contributions. In the vertical axis, we have the contributions, and here we have the degree. Okay? So our theory said that if you are receiving a lot of money, you will be more corrupt. That's why our theory says. The data, the simulation also says the same. If you receive more spillovers, then the level of contribution will go down. So this is a validation. If you remove the spillovers, it doesn't go through. You see? Our theory works with the model, with the network. It doesn't work without the network. There is no relation here. So if you estimate a line here, it's going to be horizontal, so it's not these negative relations. So we have, that's, for us, it was very important, because it's not the typical R square in running just one relation. We test the model from different perspectives, at the macro level, at the country level, at the policy issue level. That's another test. We compare the profile. We use this Jacquard index of similarities. We compare vectors, and we analyze how similar they were. So if we remove the network, we also see that vectors start to differentiate. So the distribution of the resources changes if you remove the network. So it's another validation test. Okay. So that was our theoretical model. That was how we tested. How to apply it. First, we some retrospective analysis. So initial values and final values at the beginning of the sample and at the end of the sample. So we estimated the policy profiles. Okay? So this is the policy profiles for each pillar and for each cluster. As you can see, education is very important for countries in cluster 1, is not important for the others. Health is important for poor countries, infrastructure is important for poor countries. I want to emphasize here that what we are mentioning here is not the total budget, it's just the transformative budget. Because part of your budget goes to payment of the debt, to the maintenance of infrastructure. That's not the budget that we mentioned here, it's only the transformative budget. Okay? If you want to move from this level to this level, it's not a stock, it's a flow. So if you want to go from this level to this other level, you have to redistribute resources in this way. Okay? So there is variety from one pillar to the other. There is within variety, within the pillar there is a lot of variety. So we are able to do that, to infer the distributions of the budget in each country. That's the retrospective analysis. What about the prospective analysis? What about if we specify different goals? For instance, if Mexico wants to imitate Switzerland or Japan, the profile will change. So more or less they are similar, but there are some changes here. For example, this line goes from here to here, health, down. Okay. The difference is more important if you compare uranium with China. For example, this is research and development. It's not only important if you imitate Spain, it's more important if you imitate China. Okay, so there are differences in terms of which country is the treated country and which country is the target country. Okay? So we were able to be very specific. We are not all that specific. For example, if you analyze these models using system dynamics, these people tell you, if you invest 1% more in water infrastructure, you will find after 11 years that there's going to be an increase in secondary enrollment. So they gave very specific details, despite that the model is not very well validated. We are not as specific as they, okay? Our model is much more validated than those system dynamic models, but our inferences are qualitative in the sense. The thing that we can say is that in the case of Mexico, public governance, so I can tell you the parameters, so the rankings, and also, let's say, public governance is 2 times more important than the macroeconomic problem. That kind of inference we can provide. We cannot go more than that, okay? Because the model is not designed for giving a specific budget. And besides, because this is only a transformative budget, not a whole budget.
Is there any sense, Gonzalo, that can you say that normatively would it be better for Mexico to copy Japan or to copy Chile? Can you make such a statement in welfare terms or anything?
But I mean, it depends on your desires. No? I guess if you want to, I mean, everybody knows that Japan is more technologically oriented. That's the issue about these sustainable development goals, no? That we were very concerned about the economy, but not about social issues, not about the ecology. But with this type of thinking, we can do it. Well, what about if we think different and we go for the economy? Our priorities will have to change. So in the most recent paper that we just produced, we have a measure of policy coherence. And the idea was like this, is you estimate with the retrospective analysis, you estimate a profile, okay? How good is that profile? That profile is consistent with following, let's say, Denmark. So what we do is we use our initial condition of Mexico, the network of Mexico, we use the model, we simulate, but the goals are the goals of Japan or the goals of Denmark. So we use kind of counterfactual type of analysis. We use like development goal of another country in the OECD because Mexico decided, I don't know, in the 1994 or something like that, to enter the OECD. The main reason because Mexico wanted to be like those people. So our question was, well, Mexico was able to do that after 20 years or so we did that. Huh? We used the estimated profile for Mexico in that period, and then we took the targets of long time ago, not the current one levels of indicators of those ones, but the indicators 10 years ago or something like that. Mexico was able to have a coherency profile to imitate those ones, and the answer is no. We are not very coherent. Korea, who did the same, entered more or less the same time than Mexico, was very coherent.
It was one of your first slides, interdependencies between the development goals. How did you measure that, and did you see anything that would indicate inverse relationships between some of the goals? Just from my very cursory knowledge, I've read some of them, and some of the development goals there seems to be an inverse kind of relationship between them.
Yeah. Well, what you see in the network are not the goals, are the indicators. The indicator is an endogenous variable. Has to do with the goals, has to do with the policy priorities, has to do with the inefficiencies. Everything has an impact on the level of the indicator, okay? So the typical problem that we find in this analysis is that they use the indicator as they were the policy variable. It's not the case. The indicator is an endogenous variable. It's the outcome of many things, the goal, the policy, and the correction. All that combined gives you the indicator, okay? So the problem is with that gross indicator, how we estimate this non-observable variable that we call policy profile. You cannot see it. Just looking at the budget, you cannot see it, okay? Just looking at the indicator, you cannot see it. You have to discover the true policy profile. Once you discover, you can make these counterfactual exercises. See what I mean? Here we don't have environmental goals in this database. We will go with in our next generation of this model. We will go with this database that the people are pushing. Then we will have these environmental variables, and then we will have negative links. Okay, so we are now designing a system to deal with negative links. Here we only have positive links. And another thing that we are going to have some progress in this respect, we only have instrumental variables. What do I mean by that? A policy issue is connected with one goal, okay? One-to-one relationship. But what about GDP? GDP is a comprehensive variable. Okay? It's an integral variable. So GDP is going to be a node in our network, but it's not going to be a policy issue. You see? So there are many variables like that. For instance, the Gini coefficient, the Hausman index of complexity, the GDP, those are going to be nodes in our network, but they're not going to be policy issues or policy variables. Okay, that's what I mean. That is going to be an important step in the direction.
There's another differentiator between, in one group, Mexico, Venezuela, Brazil, Russia. In the other group, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore. If your economy's strength is really tied to the price of one commodity, and somebody knocks the props out from under the price of that commodity, you're vulnerable to all kinds of trouble. All the countries in that first group, when the U.S. imposed sanctions on Russia, part of which was dropping the oil price by 50%.
You cannot reach your targets.
Brazil, Venezuela, Mexico were in a world of hurt. South Korea wasn't dependent on oil revenue.
Sure. You know, for that, we have this other paper that we just published in this journal, Complexity. We also do some resilience analysis. What about if there is an earthquake?
Yeah.
So you have this idea that you have to put a lot of money in infrastructure. What's the first priority? But all of a sudden, you have an earthquake. So you have to recover from that. What will happen with the rest of your targets? You're going to achieve them or not?
Yeah.
So there is an issue of resilience. So we are able to do that. Okay. Yes, that's about it.
Interesting. What are you going to do next?
Well, you know, we are trying to sell this project to these people in the UNDP. And we are close. At least the people that are in charge of the Latin American chapter look at it, and he's very enthusiastic because he knows the literature.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have many approaches. You have just static networks, you have system dynamics, many qualitative assessments, and these ones, for them, seems to be the most formal. So we're in discussions if we are going to do it for them, for the Latin American countries.
Look more at the true set of incentives facing bureaucrats. Look more at the true incentives the bureaucrats see.
Yeah.
Typically, they're doing what they do because they like it.
Okay.
And one of the big incentives for them is to remain useful to whoever the top decision makers are, that they get to stay where they are. So if you get to a high enough level, somebody paying you off is worth it to go corrupt. But more typically, what bureaucrats like is stability. And when you start telling a bureaucrat about a threat to resilience that they can respond to and look good for responding to, that's really good. If you start telling them about something that their boss doesn't want to hear, that's really bad. And they're going to want to squelch it.
Okay. We did something in another paper that we decide, let's specify two types of policies. One, that you design a policy and you are very rigid. You stick with that. So no matter that bureaucrat is diverting funds, you don't punish him. You stick with the policy. You are very disciplined. You will not change because the IMF told you to do that. You are going to be very disciplined, and we are not going to punish that bureaucrat. What will happen with the general outcome? And we find, sounds paradoxical, that if you stick to the rule, the level of corruption goes down. If you don't punish the people in particular, because you create a different norm in the system, and that takes you to a lower level of corruption. Sounds paradoxical. Don't punish corruption as much, and you will reduce corruption.
No, that's Huey Long. Honest graft. Don't punish honest graft. It's part of the cost of doing business. If the bridge costs 3 times what it should have, and the difference went into somebody's pocket, but you got a good bridge, part of the cost of doing business. You leave it alone. If the bridge falls into the river, then somebody's going to jail.
Yeah, this is the libertarian critique of modern urban infrastructure, that it costs much more than it should. The private sector was really incentivized to do properly with a lot less. There's an implicit bargain between the state and the big Bechtels of the world to provide a super conservative structure that comes at a giant cost.
Yeah, what people see as inefficiency may actually be an improvement in robustness. You can build something that's perfectly efficient as long as there's not a big wind. If there's a big wind, it collapses. So you want to build beyond what's efficient. One of the things that frightens the living daylights out of me about healthcare is that we keep trying to be more and more efficient. We don't want to see hospitals 2/3 full. We want to see high utilization. Great. What happens when you get a pandemic? Where are you going to put them?
The parking lot.
Yeah, exactly. That's no joke. And the problem is, what you see is redundancy under normal operation becomes safety stock in an emergency.
Gonzalo, we have one of those econometricians from the 80s who made their name by doing these kinds of country level analyses of corruption, etc. What would they say about this much more computationally intensive and network-centric approach? I mean, would they view it as a black box, or what would they say about this approach?
Well, if they do it as a black box, we have this idea of this social mechanism. We can show them it's not a black box. I'm showing you step by step which are the causal channels of this process. So it's not a black box. It's more a black box in a typical regression. But behind that, here we have channels. Maybe he will be critical of the timing of the causality. That needs to be solved. Because we only have contemporaneous causality. So that's a drawback. But I mean, given the cover of the series and given the knowledge of the causality networks, it's difficult to tackle right now that problem. I mean, this network causality is improving my health. According with my reading, it's improving a lot. But I have that to show you that it's not a black.
We also want to look more at the operation of really effective large criminal organizations. Russia, for example, don't look at government corruption. There are like 7 major cartels that work very efficiently and very effectively, and they're all criminal. But within those organizations, as within, if you read The Godfather, now that's a criminal organization. Within that organization, they have strict rules and they have strict enforcement. You may be out there doing drug trade, which is illegal, or collecting the prostitution trade, which is illegal. But if you cheat the dawn on how much of the money you brought back, boom, you're gone. There are rules and they are enforced. They just don't happen to be the government's rules.
Yeah, another thing that we can test in the model, that's another question that we're looking at, is that, let's say, if you improve the rule of law, these kind of things, you will banish corruption? That's not the case. Not the level at the top, you just reduce, I mean, you have more accountability, better monitoring of corruption, better rule of law. You don't remove corruption. It's part of the system. It's part of the interdependencies of the system. So we're working on that to be more specific, but the first estimation that we already run, that's the case. You don't remove corruption, just improving the rule of law.
Any other questions?
What did you build the model in? What did you build the model in?
Which language?
Yeah, what language?
Python.
Is it possible that you could have new actors emerge in this model? So, for example, when the USSR was dissolved, lots of new states were created. Is that, or are you assuming that these states are the states that's going to be in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I mean, just in there are many equations there. It's kind of simple. The model is pretty simple.
Yeah. Okay.
7 equations in there. There's not a lot behind that. Maybe because that is not a black box.
Yeah.
Get back to the greatest lines in the history of music. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody.